Hello, everyone. I'm Vincent Doumeizel. I'm a senior advisor for the ocean at the United Nations Global Compact. I'm also author of the book, The Seaweed Revolution. And I'm here to tell you how seaweed, the greatest untapped resource we have on the planet, is part of the solution we all need. So I don't come from the maritime sector or marine biology sector. Actually, I come from the food sector. And I realized, working in the food industry for the last 20 years, that there is no way to feed the world of tomorrow. We have already 1 billion people starving on the planet. We have every day 215,000 people in addition to feed. And we are running out of resources because the yields are declining, and the food systems we have became the biggest contributor to the acceleration of climate change and environmental crisis. They became the biggest contributor to water scarcity, soil depletion, biodiversity loss, and somehow social injustice. So we need a new solutions, at least from our food systems. So back in the 70s, there was some hope that the solution would come from eating pills, and that would be the future. But being French, dinner and eating is all about joy and celebration. I'm sure some of you may argue that eating pill might be joy and celebration sometimes, but let's not get into that discussion. And I think the future is to eat something that is good, that is a source of life on the planet. So the ocean covers 70% of our world and contribute to less than 3% of our food in calorie supply. So that's where we need to go if we want to grow more resources and feed in a sustainable way the entire world population. And actually, there's nothing new about it. It's existing already. It's there. A region in the world already cultivates more than 30 million tons of a resource that does not need land, does not need pesticide, and you don't even need to water seaweed. That's the other thing. So it's a free resource. And there's one region for a simple reason, is that, let's see if that worked well. There are more people living inside this circle than outside of it. So this region has learned to develop seaweed cultivation way before we did because they had to. The fast growth of the population there forced them to start the seaweed revolution 60 years before all of us. But now we are in the same stage. We are running short of resources on land, and we will have to develop this solution as well if we want to save our planet. So once again, bear in mind that if you think that we are many people in Paris, then you should go in Dhaka in Bangladesh. So what the solution looks like there, it does look like this. Big seaweed farms. They have multiple benefits. They sequester carbon, we'll see that, they do a lot of things. So that's how you grow seaweed, that's how a seaweed farm looks like, and that's the way Asia is feeding its huge population. That's a seaweed farm, basically, so you grow lines in the ocean. Seaweed naturally grows on the line, and you just have to take the lines out, cut seaweed, and use them. You just need sun and salt water and a few nutrients that you get from the land. So that's how it looks like from below water. So you can see it's a 3D farming. It's not a 2-dimension, it's 3-dimension farming. So you can grow very deep, actually. You can go up to 30 meters deep growing seaweed. That's why the volume are very, very impressive. There was a calculation from Wageningen back in 2016 that with 2% of the ocean dedicated to seaweed cultivation and restoring biodiversity around, we could feed 12 billion people in protein with no need from protein from vegetal or animal from land. Okay, so that's still, but to do that, we will have to learn how to grow seaweed, and that the biggest challenge we have is to learn how we can grow seaweed. So we have some labs, we'll see that in detail a bit later, but we have to understand how to grow our endemic species. So far, we only know how to grow, we have only domesticated the Asian species. So let's say you are in Canada and you want to start agriculture. If you only know how to farm guava, banana, and rice, you're not going to start to farm now. So we need to learn how to grow our endemic species, and that's a big, big task, maybe the biggest challenge of all. There's a lot of different seaweed. Seaweed doesn't mean much. There's 12,000 different types of seaweed. All of them are edible. They are all edible, as long as they are not rotten on the beach. So they are all good. There's no bad seaweed. The green seaweed, the sargassum seaweed, they are a symptom of the problem, that is the pollution of the land. But they are all good, and they are all delicious. So very different seaweed. To illustrate that, we have the red, the brown, and the green. So they are very different. Of course, they grow in different places. Some grow in warm water, some grow in cold water, the big brown notably. There's really a lot of difference. And to explain that difference, we have to remember that life started on the planet 2 billion years ago, or 4 to 2 billion years ago, with algae. So we are all descendants of blue algae here. And it started with cyanobacteria and microalgae, and then we had some seaweed. Seaweed were the first complex living organism. To start with, we had only the green and the red seaweed. The green seaweed moved on land 500 million years ago only, and gave birth to the entire vegetation that you can see around you. So today, a green seaweed is genetically much closer to an oak tree or to a strawberry than it is to a red seaweed. The difference between a red seaweed and a green seaweed is bigger than the difference between a fungi and an elephant, basically. That's way different, which means that we will have a wide range of possible application out of them. Of course, the first one, I'm French, so food, of course. So seaweed is absolutely delicious. I think we should circulate some seaweed food somehow. Lloyd, if you're around. Yeah, here. So we'll circulate some food here. So you can taste how seaweed is good. You know, that's what I do with kids. They have to try, kids, to understand. I'm sure you are all old kids. So food is delicious, and not only is delicious, and sometimes I'm told, you know, well, seaweed is no good, it's slimy, it's smelly, it's unsexy, but seaweed is sexy and cool and delicious. I'm sure if you try some raw potatoes or cocoa bean like this, you won't like it. Learn to cook them, then you have French fries or you have chocolate, delicious. Same with seaweed, we have to learn how to cook them. And then we have to learn how to like them. So why, not only it's good, delicious, but it's good for your body. Seaweed is a nutritional bomb. It has a lot of everything you need. No fat, no sugar, but a lot of magnesium, a lot of vitamins, notably the vitamin B12. That is the only vegetable where you can find vitamin B12. You have proteins. Some seaweed can have up to 40% protein, when soy is only 25% protein. That's amazing. You have zinc, you have phosphorus, and so forth. So, I mean, in Japan, seaweed makes up 10% of the diet and contribute to the very long life expectancy and the very low level of cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes, and cancer. So that's something to be learned, and that's something that seaweed by nature, it's anti-inflammatory, antifungal, antibacterial, antiviral, analgesic, and the best prebiotic you can get on this planet. So seaweed is good to eat, it's good for your body. But not only it's good for you, it will be good for the animal, obviously. So, okay, I can hear some of you saying, maybe not here in ChangeNOW, but I can hear some of you say, no, I want to stick to my T-bone steak, you know, forget about this green stuff, disgusting. Okay, at least if you really want to destroy the planet and keep eating T-bone, at least feed them with seaweed. It looks, at the first glance, quite logical that feeding salmon with seaweed is a good idea. I mean, so far we feed salmon with GMO soy milk coming from Amazonia, which has destroyed the entire forest and which has traveled across the entire planet. Let's give them seaweed. Could be a good idea. And if you look at a seaweed farm, there's always a lot of life around, because seaweed is a basic source of food on the planet, and that's where all the life has started. But it's not only good for fish, so not only a good source for feed for agriculture, but it's a very good food for animals. These ships are the most expensive one in the world. They are from North Sea, north of Scotland, and they are only fed with seaweed. And they are the ones served to the Prince William and King Charles. So that's quite interesting, you know. And not only it's good for them, they will grow better, the animal welfare will be better. It will boost their immune system just as it does for us. So they will be healthier. And not only that, for some methane, for the cows, seaweed will cut the methane emission. So that sounds like a trivial point, but think about it. If we just give 40 grams to each and every cow on the planet, 40 grams of a small red seaweed, it will impact the climate the same way as if we stop each and every car on the planet overnight. Just 40 grams of this small seaweed. So the impact on the climate is important as well, just here. Seaweed will also replace fertilizers. Seaweed is full of what we dump on land, because everything we dump on land ends up in the ocean, and it feeds seaweed. So seaweed is full of nitrogen and full of phosphate. And it's a natural biostimulant that will enrich the soil and protect the plant, make them more resistant to cold, to salt, and so forth. So we have here an opportunity to create a regenerative and circular agriculture. We cannot think about building circular and regenerative agriculture without 2/3 of the planet. We will have to integrate in this regenerative agriculture the ocean. Here you have an example of what is done in China. China, they get, through the seaweed, they get all the nutrients, phosphorus, phosphate, and nitrogen that come from the land. They get the seaweed, they farm seaweed, instead of having green tides as we do in Brittany or sargassum as we do as we have in Caribbean. They farm seaweed, they get the seaweed back on land, and in 5 years from now, China will be neutral in phosphate, which means that they won't need to extract phosphate from the North Africa and from Russia or to buy from them. They will be neutral, and we all know that phosphate, we will all run short of phosphate very soon. Some are already talking about the phosphageddon, which will be the end of the phosphate resources, and we will all starve on this planet because there will be no agriculture left. So once again, building a bridge between agriculture and ocean, recycling element, and not only phosphate, but carbon, fresh water, oxygen, everything is recycled by life underwater. And seaweed is absolutely key to that. So we could stop some kind of pollution here. And when we hear about pollution, we all think about plastic pollution. And guess what? Seaweed, I mean, this is noodles packs made out of seaweed, so they dissolve when you cook them. There's no packaging anymore. You can do the same with your coffee in the morning. It's not Pla doing that, a great company. So seaweed packaging is compostable, biodegradable, and edible. You can eat the packaging at the end. You all have seen these ho-ho bubbles that are being distributed. That's the ho-ho bubbles. So you swallow it all. You have all kinds of tests, of course. You can have packaging for everything. They replaced all the plastic glass during the London Marathon. 40,000 plastic glass replaced by these seaweed bubbles. And the good news for some of you, I'm sure, is that you can even get whiskey in there. So, which is cool. I'm sure you will agree. You have some kind of plastic film, so it's very visual. And you can replace coating as well. You can replace the cardboard, which is interesting because the dirty secret of them is that they are full of plastics. So, but seaweed is naturally non-absorbent, so it will stay. I mean, it is pure seaweed, there's no plastic here. You can do much more. You can replace cotton, because cotton is 2% of the agriculture, but 25% of the pesticide, and it needs a lot of water and a lot of herbicides. So you can, you have some a German company producing tampon out of seaweed or at the top. You can do a lot of textile as well. Quite amazing to think. But I was invited to the Fashion Week. Look at me, to talk about seaweed, because that's a very interesting thing for them. They think that could be part of the future of fashion as well. Textile, a lot of non-sustainable product. Seaweed, we should stop talking about seaweed. We should call them sea vegetables, so we can all understand how delicious they are. Or else, sea forest. because they are the source of life. They restore biodiversity. They provide habitat. This seaweed that you can see here, they grow of 40 centimeters a day, up to 60 meters high. They are real forests, and they sequester a lot of carbon. Not only they will restore biodiversity, but they will sequester a lot of carbon. And doing that in two different ways. One, they will decarbonize the economy, replacing plastic, fertilizers, cutting methane emission, and they will also sink carbon in the deep ocean. When seaweed degrades or lose biomass, it sinks in the deep ocean, and there's no bacteria to degrade them, so they can stay sequestered for thousands, if not millions of years. There's a small aquatic plant 50 million years ago that has proliferated on the planet. This has decreased the temperature by 20 degrees, just sequestering carbon in the deep ocean. So there's a solution here. And because you don't launch a revolution without tackling social injustice, seaweed, and we will see that in detail, is also a great way to provide resources to coastal community and notably to women in emerging countries where the fishing resources will disappear. So once again, we have a multifaceted solution. We have a great source of hope for the next generation. And in order to do that, we have launched 3 years ago a seaweed manifesto that you can still download with some great players from all over the world. We have designed this seaweed manifesto, a 10-page document telling the world, and it was introduced to the United Nations General Assembly, what seaweed can do and what needs to be done to enable that potential. And one of the first actions was to create a coalition, because the industry is so far very fragmented. So we had created a coalition, the Global Seaweed Coalition, that you can join for free if you are interested in seaweed. We gather more than 1,000 stakeholders, and we are trying to advocate, influence the world, gather investment, accelerate science and research, and work together, once again, to get the right regulation in place and so forth. All in all, through the coalition and through the United Nations remit, we really want to supply, we are feeding the next generation with fears and drama so far, and we would like to feed them with solution and hope. So that's our remit, that's what we want to do, because seaweed should be a great source of hope. So if you can want to know more detail at the Seaweed Revolution book, which is supporting all of this, and some link. And I think I'm running quite late to introduce my next, I should say my mentor, because he's one of the, to me, one of the best seaweed scientists in the world. He's based in Roscoff, Philippe Potin. So Philippe is a scientific director at the Station Biologique de Roscoff, which is one of the biggest European center for seaweed research. He has like 40 years experience of seaweed. You know, eating seaweed makes you look young. And he's one of the best scientists once again. So Philippe, tell us why science is so important and what are the biggest challenges for science?
Thank you, Vincent, and hello to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk about science behind what we are willing to develop in terms of scaling up the potential of seaweed worldwide. So, because without this strong basis, we will be unable to really cope with all the challenges we are facing. So science was at the origin of the potential of developing the consumption of seaweeds in Asia. In fact, until the Second World War, the cultivation of seaweeds was not such much developed in Asian countries like Japan or China or Korea. It developed when the farmers, which were just coping with some natural recruitment from wild seedlings which were settling on rocks or on bamboos, were just able to produce very small amount of productions. And then when they discovered the potential of domesticating the seaweed species by controlling, by really being able to control their life cycles, how to really produce large amount of seedlings they were able to develop on industry. First in China to address a very important challenge at that time in China, which was the iodine deficiency in the populations, especially in far remote places in China. They developed the large-scale cultivation of kombu from nothing, because the species was not originating from China. They imported some cultivars, in fact, from Japan and also Russia, to develop a new industry and to cultivate a crop which has allowed to provide sufficient amount of iodine for the population. Similarly, in Japan, they developed the industrial cultivation of nori, which provide, of course, the seaweed sheet. You all know, wrapping the sushi maki. And the development of the cultivation of nori was not only in Japan, but also it started later on in Korea, both the North and South Korea. And it increased very importantly during the last 30 years, from nearly nothing about 30 years ago. And then South Korea is the second player in this region, in fact, in front of Japan. So that means there is a potential really to develop the cultivation of seaweed if it is strongly based on the knowledge of the domestication of the species. And by this domestication, it is not only a matter of controlling the reproduction and to produce seedlings. It's also to be able to select the most suitable varieties in terms of course, potential for productivity, but also for the suitable uses, and especially when you are dealing with food, to have the most nutritious seaweed as possible.
And talking about reproduction, what are the various ways for seaweed to reproduce? I'm sure people are...
Basically, there is two ways of reproduction. One is based on sexual reproduction, like we are doing. That it's an important way of reproduction, which in fact prevent some genetic drift from is the best way to preserve the potential of growth. But you have also another mean, which is asexual, which could be by reproductive cells, which will not, in fact, cross-fertilize. But you have also the potential, like you are probably doing with some green plants at home or in your garden, just by propagating seaweeds by propagules, just by cutting some pieces of seaweeds and then letting them grow again. That is the case for several groups of species, like in the green seaweed, the sea lettuce, but also in the red seaweeds, a lot of tropical red seaweeds, which are, in fact, essentially propagated using this way.
So tell us, what is a seaweed? I mean, how would you describe a seaweed, and what is not a seaweed as well? Because there's always some confusion about that.
Yeah. As you introduced previously, Vincent, the seaweeds are algae, so they belong to the group of algae, which in fact encompass a lot of different lineages of microscopic algae, which are mainly represented in the plankton, both in the ocean and in fresh water. And, but the appearance of the multicellularity has only occurred in a few lineages among the living trees, including in three groups of algae: the green, as you mentioned, the red, and the brown. And the other groups, which are in fact developing multicellularity, are the animals and the fungi. They are the only group of organisms on Earth which are really able to do that. And so seaweeds are really the representative of the multicellular algae, and they have developed, of course, based on this multicellularity, a lot of traits which are specific, which provide new potential for in terms of chemical composition of the seaweeds, because they have to develop, for example, an envelope around their cells, which is quite similar to the extracellular matrix, which is surrounding our cells, and which is very important for cell communication, for cell integrity, and but also for defense mechanisms, for the immunity of seaweeds. So there is plenty of specificity, which provide, in fact, all the qualities we are now exploiting in seaweeds. which are providing very nice fibers, which of course could act as prebiotic, but also as very interesting ingredients for the field of packaging, as you exemplified. But also a lot of vitamins, which could be specific to some groups, or some other small molecules which were used as signaling molecules first, and which are very important molecules which other activities in other organisms.
And spirulina is not seaweed, and Posidonia is not seaweed. So tell us about it.
Spirulina is, in fact, it's a bacteria. But as you mentioned, the spirulina belongs to a group of so-called blue bacteria, the cyanobacteria, which are the most ancient photosynthetic organisms on Earth. They appeared about 3.5 billion years ago, and they are at the origin of photosynthetic organisms on Earth. So they are a very important group, but of course in cyanobacteria they do not develop a true multicellularity. They can group individual cells, but so they are completely different for the much more evolved
and seagrass
algae. And seagrass are in fact terrestrial plants, which reconquer the marine environment. They belong to a family which first evolved as all land plants on Earth, and which probably through the changes in the level of the sea has to cope with the elevation of this level, and has evolved the potential to adapt to the seawater environment. It's completely now a group which is exclusively found in seawater.
Yeah, and it has roots, and seaweed has no
and
roots.
It has roots, and it has flowers. It will also produce pollen grains for fertilization of female organs, so that means they are completely similar to terrestrial plants in terms of reproduction.
So if you see flowers and roots, it's not a seaweed. That's the key learning here.
That's key learning.
I mean, the most important question maybe of all, I mean, you are working in the domestication and trying to, and for sure when we hear about domestication, too often we hear exploitation. So how can we avoid the pitfall that we had with land agriculture, with GMO, with industrial farming, with monoculture? How can we avoid that? And how can we make sure that growing seaweed at scale will not impact negatively the environment?
I think we have to consider that the way that the seaweed cultivation was developed in Asia and in Southeast Asia, it was based on the small holders, in fact, which were sometimes fishermen which were just willing to develop other businesses, and which were forced sometimes to develop other businesses to survive, and which were which started to grow seaweeds on small areas, and then progressively group in some form of cooperatives, which were well organized. And we have very good examples in Japan of this organization, which has allowed to scale up the farms and to provide some mechanization for the farmers, and also some improvement in the processing.
But can it be dangerous for the environment?
In fact, the seaweed cultivation basically is not dangerous for the environment, except if you are playing with the seaweed biodiversity and by transferring some seaweed from a place of the world to another one. And we have done that in the past. Yeah. But we know our responsibility now facing the loss of biodiversity worldwide, that it is no longer possible to do that, and we have to rely on the local genetic diversity of seaweeds, which is huge, in fact, and which is poorly studied in many areas of the world at the moment, but which is, in fact, providing a lot of resources. And if we can exploit that and we can grow seaweeds on a reasonable scale, we will provide services which sometimes are disappearing in the ocean. So we have some areas where there is an excess of nutrients coming from the rivers, excess nitrogens and phosphorus, and seaweeds are growing proliferating in these areas. Like we have the case of green tides in Brittany, but also the bad examples of sargassum proliferating in the Caribbean. So we know that to re-equilibrate these ecosystems, we have to help these ecosystems to restore the potential of growing seaweeds in these ecosystems. And we will, of course, remediate to the excess of nutrients, but we will also provide additional services, like by the photosynthesis reducing the acidification of the oceans in this area, which is increasing due to the lack of, to increase of CO2 capture by the ocean. And also, of course, we will provide some new niches for the biodiversity by providing habitats on food for animals. We will also have some restoration of food ecosystems. And that we have a few examples of this restoration, which is sometimes not operated directly by cultivation, but which involves some cultivation or domestication, because when you are transplanting, for example, some seaweeds in a place to restore plants which have disappeared, it is a matter of beginning of the domestication. So that could be done by pure artificial cultivation, but also by just using aquaculture to provide seedlings for the restoration.
Thank you very much, Philippe. And a round of applause. I think we'll have to our next guest talking about food. As you say, well, as I say, we are in France, so we have to explore what food can do, the French way to eat seaweed. So I should have a jingle now and some guests coming, hopefully. Vincent Lacaze from Zalg.
Hello.
And Deniz Ficicioglu from BettaF. Okay.
Hello, everyone.
So two innovation in the world of seaweed and in the food world of seaweed. And we really wanted to invite these two innovations, these two startups, because they are handling the problem in a different way. How to help people to eat seaweed. I mean, that's not in our culture, so we have to help the adaptation of seaweed cuisine. So we start with you, Deniz. I mean, BettaF, you are mimicking tuna using seaweed instead of tuna. So can you tell us more about the story, how you get there, and why did you do that?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for this amazing introduction on the potential of seaweed, which, yeah, like you've seen, I don't think we can live without seaweed in the future. But unfortunately, what we realized on our entrepreneurial journey is that most of the consumers actually don't care about seaweed as much as we do. So we started working on a trick and a vehicle to make people eat seaweed on a daily basis without them actually knowing or the need to care about it so much. So we are the first ones to replace an animal from the ocean with plants for the oceans, and that's what we do at BettaF. We created a vegan tuna alternative, canned tuna more specifically, that has a content of 20% of seaweed. So it's nutritionally better for the body and has a huge impact on the maritime environment. And we launched the first products 1.5 years ago and are available across 8 countries already right now.
And so one of the big deals within is seaweed domestication, and we have very little cultivation in Europe, and you are trying to source locally, as you say. So do you have problem with sourcing, and do you get enough resource? I mean, we are a bit in the chicken and egg problem. Like there's not enough production because there's not enough demand, but then the new startups, they cannot really supply. So are you facing this kind of issue?
Not yet, and I say unfortunately. So this is the main thing that we're trying to work on, right? Increasing demand. So more people dare to go into seaweed cultivation and realize that they actually can make a living of it. Because right now, that's, if you ask me, the main hurdle for them. Why would they switch from fishing to seaweed farming if they can't pay the bills? So unfortunately, we don't have an issue in supply yet, but yeah, I think we're growing with the demand and increasing the demand slowly.
And bearing in mind that putting too much pressure on the stocks may endanger the species. I mean, are you trying to prefer using cultivated seaweed instead of?
Yes. So right now we're using both cultivated seaweed and controlled wild harvested seaweed. But our ultimate goal is to use cultivated seaweed only to protect the environment, to really control the seaweed that we're using, also to ensure quality. I mean, if we're talking about revolutionizing the food system, we need to be aware that the large corporations, they have very high quality standards and quality assurance standards that we need to meet long term. So cultivated seaweed can do that, but right now it's a mix still. And the seaweed we use is from Norway and Ireland, not France, unfortunately, yet, hopefully soon. But yeah, trying to source locally is the goal.
So yeah, just for you to bear in mind, I mean, in France, which is the second biggest maritime country in the world, we represent 0.01% of the seaweed production worldwide. So we are already in the Stone Age, and 99% of this 0.01% is a wild harvest. So we are yet to enter the seaweed cultivation stage. And indeed, it's important to support that, as you mentioned. What are the next stage for you? I mean, where do you want to go? Do you think like mimicking China is just a transition stage, or do you really want to end up with mimicking other type of food?
That's a really good question. I mean, we've been doing this for 4 years now, so we've been around for a while, and so this is the classic tuna sandwich, just in the vegan style. But this is actually not how we started out. So when we started out 4 years ago, we started with a different brand called Ocean Fruit, not mimicking any seafood at all. So we started out with creating seaweed salads, but seaweed salads in different flavors like beetroot and horseradish, mustard and dill, to make it interesting to the European audience. It works, yes, but honestly, it didn't excite too many people immediately. So we said, okay, we can't wait for the consumers to pick up, you know, the seaweed taste. We actually need to do something now to, like you said, aid the transition. So I'm 100% sure that at some point we will use seaweed just like we use spinach today in cooking. And I totally agree with you that we need to do that, need to learn how to cook with seaweed. But most of the consumers don't have time. They're not interested in changing their habits. I think habit change plays a huge role in the transition. So until then, we just deliver them what they already love and what they eat on a daily basis, but enrich it and enhance it with as much seaweed as possible.
And you can buy seaweed in any, at least organic restaurant, and more in normal store. For your very product, or where, I mean, if people are interested, how can they shop it? I mean, they can order online or not yet?
Well,
very large volume then.
Yes, very large volumes. So actually, we are just about to launch in France with some food service partners. But right now, the main markets is Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Netherlands, the UK, and hopefully all over France soon. But we can learn something from you then, I guess.
Exactly. So yeah, so Vincent from Zalg, one of the co-founder of the company Zalg has been awarded as the best innovation of the year last year to the biggest, to the SIAL, which is the biggest food summit. Yeah, you have a different approach, a French way of cooking seaweed, let's say. So can you tell us more about it and what makes the difference in what you're doing?
Yes, first of all, yeah, our approach is to say, okay, seaweeds are great vegetable. You told it before. Seaweed is the most sustainable crop production base. You don't need to water them, you don't need fertilizer, you don't need land. We see the issue with water for agriculture. With Colorado, with Spain, with France now, is a huge issue. And we believe seaweed can be a solution. Seaweed won't replace anything, but if we add it to our daily meals, it can make the difference. And it's what we believe at Zalg is to make seaweeds your next favorite vegetable. But as a vegetable, you need to know how to cook it, how to prepare it. You don't eat raw salad, you need to season it. It's the same way with seaweed. So we worked with chefs and marine biologists to bring seaweed into a more convenient form of consumption. And we invent what we call, to make it easy to understand, the sea tofu. It looks like tofu in terms of texture, but it's 100% seaweed. So it's really easy to cook. You can pan fry it, deep fry it, you can eat raw. And it's a very easy way to bring seaweed in the French cuisine. One thing we saw is that seaweed is not present, it's present physically in the ocean in France, but it's not present at all in traditional French food. So our first reaction was to say, okay, why is not present? Why there is no great French meal with seaweed? Why is it only Asiatic style food that is bringing seaweed into our plates? And so we went first of all with our new products. We went to see Michelin-starred restaurants to present. We had to have the approval of people who know how to cook, and they liked it. So actually, our first clients were Michelin-starred restaurants. But if we want to have impact, we don't want to create a high-end product. We want to create a product accessible for everyone. So it's now what we are working at, bringing our products to everyone through retail and restaurants.
Yeah, and you have to. It's such a shame we don't have picture, but these products are beautiful. They look like cubes. And for the French people here, they want to do with seaweed what the pomme dauphine did with the potatoes. And they are exactly the same. It looks like mushroom or, yeah, as you say, tofu. So it's fantastic and very good. I was lucky enough to try this. So you are working with chefs right now. Who are your customers today, and how is positioned your product?
Yeah, we work mostly with food service. So meaning we distribute to restaurants. And we also develop new products who aim at, let's say, replacing imported products. We saw that during the pandemic that buying products, especially food from the other side of the world, didn't have much sense. And so we are trying to develop new products that are today imported from Asia, and we want to produce them locally.
So they are all produced locally?
Yeah, all our products are, we use seaweed cultivated in France, in Brittany, and we transform our product also in Brittany. And we aim at distributing our product in retail to everyone by next year.
And what's the story of the company? So you were funded a few years ago only, and you've been awarded. I mean, you can be French and arrogant if you want, and tell us about all the awards that you got and what's the way forward.
Yes, actually, it's a funny story because at first we were Tanguy Justin, my partner, my co-founder, is a food engineer, and the first project was it was looking into how to make how to create a locally produced chewing gum, and actually it was impossible to make it in France. But seaweed could be part of the solution, and we started looking into seaweed, and we were already passionate about the sea, about food, and we were already seaweed lovers. So we tried to. It was during the pandemic, and we saw that there were a lot of imported products, so we dig into that. We went to chefs with raw seaweed to say, okay, what do you make usually with seaweed? And we met Michelin-starred restaurants that were not able to cook seaweed when it was raw. So that was a starting point to say, okay, how can we make it more simple to cook?
And that's really core to the plate. I mean, it's something on the side in your recipes. I mean, they are really central. That's what makes a bit of difference to some seaweed that are used in condiment, mostly, notably the players. So can you tell us more about it?
Yes, exactly. The seaweeds have nutritional benefits, amazing nutritional benefits. Some of them are rich in calcium than milk. They are rich in iodine. They are rich in many minerals. So yeah, we position the seaweed at the center of the plate. We don't want to be just like a spice you add on your plate to bring taste. We really want to make it as a vegetable at the center of the plate. And we have in mind that in Japan, for example, Japanese consume 8 kilograms of seaweed per year per capita. So it's huge. It's our consumption of salad in France. So we don't pretend we'll eat as much seaweed in France in the coming years. But at least if we can put more seaweed into our plates, the balance of our place in terms of environmental impact will be much better.
Sure. Have you faced any, maybe I will come back to Deniz, have you faced any problem with regulation? Seaweed is a new food. I mean, have you encountered any problem in terms of regulation for your sourcing?
No, so far, luckily not. This is mainly because we work with European native species, right? So we don't import any species from abroad, and the beauty is about using seaweed from Norway, Ireland, France, local seaweed, is that someone at some point used to eat it, so the regulators can't really forbid us to use it. I mean, there are very strong regulations when it comes, for example, to iodine levels, etc. So this was actually one of the main challenges we had to face at first. So putting our food scientist team on the task to process the seaweed in a certain way to bring down iodine levels to a healthy level. And with that, I don't mean that too much iodine is unhealthy, but to comply with European regulations mainly. So what we're doing is not just developing the applications, so meaning the vegan tuna or vegan salmon or any new species that are coming soon, but also the underlying R&D around seaweed, because our idea is to turn seaweed into a commodity for the food industry, meaning how can we turn this, slimy, green, whatever people conceive it to be. I mean, it's not slimy, but it's actually delicious when you take it out of the ocean. But how can we turn it into something the industry is actually able to use? So is it like a kind of flour, a kind of extract or whatever? How can we turn it into an ingredient? That's the work we need to do before we actually get to the applications. And by that, we also need to look and comply with regulations, obviously. But no challenges so far that we weren't able to solve.
What about you, Vincent?
Well, we are using only French seaweed, and they are seaweeds that grow in the wild already. So we're not importing species, and we work only with farmers. So that was something very important for us, because in Europe, 90% of the production is made from wild harvesting, while in Asia, the biggest markets, it's the opposite. It's 99% of the production is made from cultivation. So it was important also for us to find new markets for these new farmers of the sea, because cultivation for now, seaweed cultivated in France for now and in Europe is much more expensive than wild harvesting. Despite it has much more environmental benefits.
And so we understand you are mostly B2B right now, you are not yet B2C. Is there any, if people want to try your product, where can they get some? Which restaurant, maybe, or which service? And is there a plan to move to B2C at some point in the future?
Yeah, we are in around 200 restaurants for now in France. We've been selling our products for the last 6 months, and before we worked more than 1 year on pure R&D. Yeah, we start exporting also our products to other countries, and next year we plan to be ready for retail, so for everyone.
And if right now we want to try your product?
I would say...
Any address to recommend in Paris?
Actually, yeah, there are new restaurants. There's a new restaurant that just opened in Paris that's called Combo. It's a fast food restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
They do only seaweed.
Yeah, great one.
So yeah, there are new restaurants also coming in the coming days.
Very cool. There's a lot of positive allegation about seaweed. So do you think you are enough supported on that the existing label are supporting you enough to really promote and sell your seaweed, which are a bit of a higher price than the normal tuna, I would say, so far at least?
Yeah, going to that price topic, because you also mentioned that earlier, I think to push a real revolution, we need to create products that are at price parity with the ones we want to recreate. In this case, a vegan tuna sandwich, a vegan or canned tuna can. So price is definitely an important factor here. But are we enough supported in that sense? That's a really good question. I think there can't be enough support in general to really push that revolution. And we've had that talk actually earlier with another seaweed expert here in the first row. And there is actually, you can tell there is a reactivated interest in the whole ocean economy and regenerative ocean economy. But it's still a lot of talk within our bubble, I'd say. So the majority of people, they are still too far away from what's actually happening in 2/3 of the globe, like you said. You know, there are countries who don't really care about what's happening in the ocean. So we need an active discussion around what's happening there, how we can push the seaweed revolution and make it more interesting for people to consume it on a daily basis.
What about the next generation? Because of course, I mean, the easiest way to change seaweed perception in the public is really to deal with the next generation. Your products are really cool for kids, I think, both of yours. So are you working around this and with canteen, maybe in schools and things like this to familiarize kids with your products? Vincent, maybe have you tried something around that?
Yeah, we are working with local schools to try to offer our products. So yeah, it's very interesting from a nutritional point of view, as you said. But I think also kids are very curious. They actually, during a trade show or events, we were very surprised to see many kids going to our stand and trying and testing our products. And when we see a group of kids, we usually have to hide our product because they eat everything. And it was really a surprise because for some people, seaweed is not edible and they have a bad image about it. Usually people from a certain generation in France that are very traditional. So yeah, we see that new generation are really open to discovering new food, and they are very receptive to the environmental impacts speech.
Much more aware about the
exactly.
crises that are. What about you, Deniz?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the younger generation and the kids today are not the ones we need to convince, to be honest. They, like you said, they're naturally curious. For them, whatever we present them today will be the default they grow up with. So they don't question what, you know, if we've eaten it before or not, because for them it's natural. Also, plant-based burgers, plant-based meat, they will never compare it to the original animal version because this is the flavor they grow up with. I think it's us, you know, that we need to convince, and like us adults, we really suck at change. I'm really sorry, but you know, we need us, all of us, to actually change and work on it and educate ourselves. But unfortunately, in that sense, we don't have time to wait for it. So in that sense, I don't believe in education, because if I would try to educate people about the benefits of seaweed, it would take us too long for actual impact to create. And so we need vehicles, we need ways to trick people into doing better on a daily basis. Because the kids will be all right. You know, they will make the right decisions. I say so. It's us who need to make better decisions.
Thank you very much to both of you for this. I mean, indeed, each time we eat and we drink, we vote for the world we want. So let's try to vote for seaweed and for this new product. I just wanted to say that Vincent just came last minute, and he's not Fiona, as mentioned on the planning, was what a problem. And thank you for joining in the very last minute due to an issue with Mara seaweed. There's a lot of other type of companies, of course, and mainly very established one that you can once again find in any organic shop. As a condiment, it's very easy to use. You don't need much seaweed. You can start with very low doses like salt or pepper, maybe, to get used to the flavor, and then move to the next stage. And we are very respectful of this work that has been done over the last 40 years by pioneers that has reached that level of where we are today. The brands, I mean, you have tried some of them like Bora Bora, Marinoe, there are so many of them, and some more like newcomers. So there's already a small tradition, notably in Brittany, and once again, we should support them through our purchasing decision. We are all environmental activists. So let's vote for seaweed, and thank you very much for your participation here.
Merci.
Thank you.
So next, we had another issue with Nancy. Nancy wanted to join us on stage all the way from Tanzania to talk about this seaweed revolution and the impact on emerging economies. Nancy had a problem with the visa and had to cancel the last minute. So she sent us a small message by video, and then I will try to elaborate and comment a bit and take a wrap on what she said. So it's quite unfortunate, but let's hear what Nancy has to tell us.
Hello. Greetings to all ChangeNOW Summit delegates. My name is Nancy Raba. I'm the co-founder and chief executive officer of Healthy Seaweed Company Limited, which is based in Tanzania. My company deals with processing seaweed into diverse seaweed-based foods to promote healthy living while empowering women seaweed farmers. It's unfortunate that I couldn't join you today. I was really looking forward to take selfies in the Eiffel Tower, but I had some visa issues, and I'm glad that I'm given this opportunity to share my 2 cents with you all. So I want to share about seaweed farming in Tanzania. I'm also a seaweed farmer. I'm in a seaweed business, and it warms my heart that seaweed conversations are taking root in globally, and this really puts seaweed in the global map. So seaweed farming in Tanzania started about 30 years ago, and it is dominated by women. And women make up about 80% of women seaweed farmers, and there are about 20,000 women seaweed farmers in the part of Zanzibar, and about 5,000 in the part of mainland. So Zanzibar are pioneers, and we can call them pioneers of seaweed farming in Africa, because also Tanzania is the 3rd largest producer of high quality seaweed globally, and the 1st in Africa. And we produce 2 types of species, and commonly names are known as spinosum and cottony. But most of our products, about 90% of them are being used for export, and less than 1% are the ones that are being used inland. So for my case, in 2020, I came to realize that there is some sort of low usage of seaweed in the country, because most of it is being used for export. So it even came to my realization much more in a greater way in 2020 when Corona hit, and WHO recommended that we should be adding foods that are boosting our immunity into our diet, and an example came as seaweed. And then I was wondering, because I have a background in marine sciences, I have masters in marine sciences, so I have worked with the coast, I've walked along Tanzanian coast, I have seen seaweed, but I was only interested to study seaweed in relation with climate change. How does climate change affect seaweed, and how can we have more production? But I felt I was blind to see the over 20,000 women that are only depending on this type of farming for their livelihoods. So that clicked my mind, and I started to do mapping in different villages in Zanzibar to know how do they perceive seaweed, especially in terms of food. And the women would answer me that tourists would come and they would prefer to have foods that are enhanced with seaweed rather than those that are not enhanced with seaweed. And when I asked why, they had no answer. Then I came to realize that there is lacking of innovation when it comes to producing diverse foods that are appealing and are relatable to the community to want to consume them. My company now it has over 10 product lines in which they're very relatable, from seaweed hot sauce to seaweed porridge and etc. So the ecosystem of seaweed in Tanzania still needs much of innovation, and we are so happy. My company was funded with the Global Seaweed Coalition last year, and we're working with the government to produce the first standards for seaweed for food in Tanzania. It's sad that for over 30 years we had no any standards for foods, and also it is so much of women dominated. So my company is so much, it has a very strong social impact of empowering women, in which we buy we buy a kilo of seaweed for them at 4 times higher price than the market price. So thank you so much for having me, and I would like to welcome you to Tanzania to come to learn about the seaweed ecosystem business. It's very interesting, and I welcome young people to come and invest. Thank you so much. Enjoy the summit.
Thank you for her, and it's a real shame that she's not here because she's really, really inspiring. Just forgot to mention that you can meet of all of us, I mean the speakers, right after the session at the bookstore, where we can sign the book. Basically, they organize a signature session at right after the session. So just to come back on this one, it's a very interesting example what has happened in Zanzibar. Zanzibar 30 years ago, women there, they have no rights, no right to get out of of their house. I mean, the only reason why they can get out of the house without authorization from their husband was for funeral. I was there with Nancy for a couple of weeks, and many other of the women we know called the Mwani Mama, because Mwani in Swahili means seaweed, so we call them the Mama seaweed, basically in my. So back 30 years ago, they were locked indoor. And we are talking about a Muslim country, very traditional, very patriarchal. And 30 years ago, we needed to grow the production worldwide of this carrageenan. Carrageenan is a seaweed extract that you can find in 70% of the food. So you had already 70 times carrageenan, I mean, not 7 or 10 times carrageenan today. Any ice cream, any beer, any meat, any toothpaste, it contains carrageenan, and it's highly needed by the food processing industry. So we were running short of carrageenan back 30 years ago, and we decided to create a seaweed farm in Zanzibar. So this is a seaweed farm, how it looks like. This is whoops. Should come. It's here, not there, here. Yeah. Here is some seaweed farm, how it looks like in Zanzibar. So we created these farms with some of this Mwani Mama. And because the fisherman revenues were declining, the fishermen kept fishing, but they asked their wife to get on the beach and work and collect and cultivate this seaweed. And as you can see, it's very easy. I mean, you just need a stick, a couple of sticks, and then ropes. You put the seaweed. I mean, this red seaweed, you cut them in 10. There's 10 seaweed growing. It's a vegetative reproduction, so it's very easy to grow. So with a few seaweed, you can really grow like big farms, so there's no capex involved. Today, seaweed is the biggest export revenue for the island of Zanzibar, I mean for the autonomous region of Zanzibar. We are talking of very sizable, that needs to be improved because they are facing a lot of problems, of course. But as mentioned by Nancy, 80% of the revenues have gone to women. These women, they consequently had to send their daughter at school and not to make them stay at home as they used to. And they are now traveling across Africa to voice that message, that seaweed is a good source of revenue. And there's a gender balance that has been very, very impressive. And it has, you may know that the president of Tanzania now is a woman, actually, which is kind of a strong example of this woman empowerment in a very traditional country. And we can see the same kind of thing in Indonesia, for instance. Indonesia is now the second biggest producer in seaweed in the world, and a lot of people in Bali, when the tourism industry collapsed in 2020 because of COVID, a lot of people moved back to seaweed farming, and some of you may have seen that in this Hollywood movie with George Clooney and Julia Roberts. It's getting popular, it's getting there. So, I mean, they move back to seaweed, and a large part of them are women. So once again, there's a strong potential for women empowerment and for generating revenue and jobs in emerging countries where the fishing resources are declining. So seaweed is very important in Zanzibar, but it can be done all over Africa and beyond. I mean, India, I mean, of course, Africa will be very important. There is some great project off the coast of Africa. We are supporting this project with the coalition in a regenerative way. There's so many different things we can do. India is another very interesting country. There's a big hunger problem in India, food, nutritional deficit at least in India. 17,000 kilometers of coastline, and with 1.5 billion people, and this such a wide coastline, India today is producing half the size of the seaweed production of this microscopic Zanzibar, which is less than 1 million people. 1.5 billion, less than 1 million, and then they are producing half the size. So you can imagine the potential for India. If India moved to seaweed production, and they have a great potential for that, then the world will be different. And the other thing we have to do is that this production that we have in Southeast Asia and Africa, so far it's a south-north production. So basically they produce seaweed, they use 25% of it to supply our needs in the West. So typically so we can get some nice, good-looking food in our fridge. But the best, our vision is to use this seaweed that they grow, not to send 25% of the biomass to the rich countries, but to feed these emerging countries. This seaweed that they are using, they are very rich, they are very nutritious. They can, I don't know if you know about the problem with iodine deficiency in Africa, but that's quite a big, big deal. And you can see kids there that are really suffering. So they can really support more social justice in this world. And as Nancy just said, we should promote this seaweed consumption in Africa because it's there, but they don't even know, they don't even use them. They could cure a lot of disease using seaweed and eating seaweed in Africa, but that's just not part of the tradition. So doing what Nancy is doing, supporting the seaweed cultivation and advocating to population, so they start to pour some seaweed in their traditional diets. It's a great, great change, and it's a real step change to support the mitigation of world hunger. And that's all about, that's a good example of this seaweed revolution that we want to enforce, not only in France, not only in the US, but also in Africa, in India, and all over the world. There are some great, great potential. Seaweed has so many opportunities, so many opportunities. If we have, once again, as mentioned by Philippe, we have to educate our children, and if your kids, they are looking for ways to change the world in a positive way, tell them to join us. We need more of them. We need a lot of marine biologists because that will not be done overnight. It will need a full generation. We have to train a new generation of marine biologists that will enable a real permaculture from the ocean, restorative, and we need to understand all of this, how it's working. So we need a lot of skilled people. But if we do this, if all together we manage to eat seaweed and to convince the next generation to get interested into what's happening in this ocean that we know less than the moon right now. If we do this, if we do cultivate, if we do enable this seaweed revolution and we do cultivate seaweed and grow food from the ocean, this next generation, it will not be the COVID generation, it will not be the climate change generation. It will be remembered as the first generation on this planet that managed to feed the entire population of our world while mitigating climate change, while restoring biodiversity and alleviating poverty. But to do that, they will need all of us. So thank you in advance. And let's meet at the library if you want to discuss more. Thank you very much, and congrats to the ChangeNOW team.